Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of March of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And once again, let's talk about the morning strikes in Kyiv with the use of Zircon hypersonic missiles. The morning started as never started the year before in Ukraine. It was a very calm morning without almost anything happened on the line of combat contact, but somewhere at 11 a.m. we start receiving reports about significant number of strikes inside of Kyiv with the use of some unknown type of weapon. And furthermore, according to the locals, according to the sources on the ground, first there was an alarm, and after a few seconds the explosions start appearing. So basically the Ukrainians who was in Kyiv had just maybe 10 or 15 or 20 seconds before the Russian missiles arrived. Later we got more details about the situation, and we have some even map showing where the Russians launched their missiles and what distance the missiles bypassed and where were the explosions. And according to information we have, the launches of Russian missiles were discovered at 10:25 a.m. of the local time, and the arrivals were discovered somewhere at 10:31 a.m. of the local time. If we calculate the distance, let's say from Crimea, very likely that the Russians were attacking from Sevastopol or something like this. If we just calculate the strict line from one part to another, and strict line not always means like the shortest direction or the longest, the distance were around 700 kilometers. So the Russian Zircon missiles bypassed 700 kilometers within a round of, let's say, 6 minutes. So that was a very unexpected. You know, the main difference between Zircon missiles and Kinzhal missiles is that Kinzhal missiles can be used by MiG-31. It's an air carrier, and you always have some, let's say, some time. You always have some time for air defense to get prepared, because you always can discover the rays of MiG-31 in the sky of Russian Federation. It gives you, let's say, 15-20 minutes, and you can, let's say, start this alarm that the Russians raised MiG-31 to the sky. So we need to be careful, the Ukrainians and Ukrainian authorities and Secret Service and very important people always have time to hide themselves, to leave this or that area or something like this. But when talking about Zircon can be used from the ships, or as I understand, from the submarines. So that's why the Ukrainians don't have time to discover the submarines, because they can attack anytime they like. So this is the most important, that when using Zircon, then Ukrainians don't have time for, let's say, for launching the air defense alarm or something like this. So once again, after the rockets, the Russian missiles Zircon were launched from Crimean area, after 6 minutes we saw the arrivals on the territory of the capital of Ukraine in Kyiv. And later we got the first videos, the first geolocations showing us the results of those strikes. And this video we can see the central part of Kyiv. The entire building was reduced to ruins, and according to information we have, according to information from the sources, this building was used by the SBU, the Special Service of Ukraine, for some purposes. And according to information we have, later we got, of course, more details. The sources are saying that the SBU in Kyiv is now on its ears. They block all possible leakage channels to defeat the Patriot air defense systems and the complex of SBU and GUR buildings. They say Bohdanivka and Maluk suddenly disappeared from the radars. And according to information we have, the target of the Russian missile strike on Kyiv this afternoon was the senior leadership of the Security Service of Ukraine. Security Service as GUR, it's the main Directorate of Intelligence, and the SBU, that's something like Russian FSB, as I understand, or FBI from the United States of America. So that building was destroyed, and as we read in the previous post, according to information we have, 2 Patriot anti anti-aircraft missile systems were hit by missile strike at Zhuliane airport in Kyiv. This was reported to TASS by the law enforcement agencies of the Russian Federation. We confirmed the defeat of 2 Patriots air defense systems in Zhuliane, they said, adding that the crew including the mercenaries and volunteers from NATO countries. So as you can see, that was a very powerful and unexpected attack, and as you can see, the Ukrainians didn't expect such a pressure and didn't expect that something like this could happen. But of course, destroyed building and destroyed Patriot systems are very important, but I would like to remind you, very important, another interesting update that we received from Turkey. You know that we remember that 2 days ago there was a terrorist attack in Moscow, and after that terrorist attack the Russians arrested the executors on the border with Ukraine. Later those executors, those terrorists, were moved to Russia, where there was an investigation process, and very likely they answered every single Russian question the Russians have. Maybe even they answered the questions that the Russians didn't ask them. And after all those, let's say, investigation process, the Russians during this night, the previous night, called to Turkey military and special services authorities, and they provided them information that in the vicinity of Istanbul there was, let's say, a terrorist camp where the terrorist organization were training their special forces, their terrorist forces, for different kind of operations. As soon as the Turkey received this information, they launched a special, let's say, clearing operation. They managed to found that camp, that terrorist camp, to clear the area and to capture or arrest significant number of terrorists. And later, after this piece of news, after this operation that took place at night, we received an update about the Russian Zircon strikes in Kyiv. If you ask my opinion, of course, this now we are going to see complete speculation and projections from the military summary side. But as I understand, first the Russians captured the terrorists, those who were the main executors of the operation in Moscow. They captured them, and of course they provided them real information and coordinates of the camp, of terrorist camp in the vicinity of Istanbul, where they had some trainings. And the Russians provided this information to Turkey forces. They made the clearing operation and capture, let's say, more powerful people in this chain. Maybe they managed to capture those people who had connections with, let's say, Ukrainian special forces, those who basically paid them the money and organized the entire operation in Moscow. So Turkey got this information and provided this information to Russians, and then the Russians, not to waste time, made immediately the Zircon strike with hypersonic missile against the building, against that, let's say, building where the Ukrainian special forces were conducting and were, let's say, planning and coordinating the terrorist operation in Moscow. Once again, this might be complete speculation and from my side, but at least if you ask my opinion, I see the situation exactly like this. Maybe later we're gonna receive more updates about this situation, about all these things from the Russian side, but for now, just let's wait a little bit to make, let's say, conclusions. And now we are moving to the situation on the ground. We got additional reports and more reports from every single direction. Let's start from Bakhmut-Artyomovsk area. The Russians continue their offensive operation from the line between Bohdanivka and Klishchiivka. Let's start from the north, because when talking about Bohdanivka, after a very long pause, operational pause of absence of any activity from the Russian side, we start receiving significant details and significant updates from the territory. The Russians increased the pressure in the area, trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back, and very heavy fire from the Russian side. And today we got the first reports from the Ukrainians that Ukrainians started running and fleeing from Bohdanivka. And the main reason of abandoning the positions inside of the village is that the Russians managed to establish control over the forest, and very likely that during the previous 24 hours and maybe 48 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and currently establish control over some something like this, or the Russians are about to establish control over something like this. During the previous day, we got a lot of updates of the clearing process in the forest between Chasov Yar and the railways. The Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainians with FPV drones, which confirms that the Russians are very, very interested in this forest. And very likely, due to the fact that the Russians captured the forest, the Ukrainians made a decision to withdraw their positions because of the risk of being encircled by the Russians. So this is the current situation. For now, we are not going to change the color of map. We need a stronger evidence of this, but if we continue receiving the same updates or of the same, let's say, pattern, then we will update the area and we will color up Bohdanivka as a gray zone. From the other side, the sources reported that after the Russians managed to establish control over Ivanovska, the Ukrainians regrouped, bring additional reinforcements and reserves, and started counterattacks towards on this village. The Ukrainians, by let's say 8 p.m. of the local time of the 25th of March, conducted a lot of attempts to counterattack the Russians from forest towards Ivanovska, but according to the Russians, they managed to repel every single Ukrainian attack. The Ukrainians had significant losses and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back. But the Russians are saying that Ukrainians are planning to renew their counteroffensive within the upcoming night and within the next few hours. So this is the situation in the area. From the other side, we see that more and more updates are telling us that the Russians are trying to improve their positions between Ivanovska and Klyshevka. They tried to maintain the gray zone, to shorten the line of combat contact, and to attack the Ukrainians on the base of their defense in Klyshevka. And we are talking about this defense belt that includes a few strongholds that located behind Klyshevka. And according to information we have, the Russians have already started bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions between Klyshevka and Seversky Donbass Canal. On this video we can see the Russian drone flying above the area and Russian artillery destroying and ruining Ukrainian forces. So the certain fire control was already established. Now the Russians need to increase the pressure, and very likely the Ukrainian forces in Klyshevka will be forced to fall back also on the Ukrainian side of the Seversky Donbass Canal. Other way, they will be encircled by the Russian forces. So as we can see, the entire situation increased. The speed of the entire situation has been increased, and mainly as a result of increased Russian pressure. Now we are moving further to Belogorovka area. We have additional reports from the territory. After a few attempts, after a lot of attempts from the Russian side to establish control over the hill, the Russians, and I reminded that most of those attempts were repelled by the Ukrainians. The Russians returned back on their start positions and they started clearing the area once again from the beginning. This is probably maybe 10th attempt from the Russian side to clear the territory with FPV drones, with flamethrower systems, with different types of weapon, and something tells me that we are about the final stage of the battle for the landfill, for Belogorovka landfill, and very likely that within, I'm not saying that during this upcoming week or by the end of the weekend, but maybe by the end of the weekend, by the way, the Russians may establish control over the hill, and then this is going to be complete collapse of defense of 81st Air Mobile Brigade in the village. So we'll see what is going to be next. Interesting details are coming from Terny, from Liman, South Kupian direction. The sources reported that the National Battalion Donbass lost its combat capabilities due to significant losses in the vicinity of Terny. And this is the second unit on this direction that lost its combat capabilities during the previous few weeks. The first one was the 21st Mechanized Brigade. This one, we had report that some battalions had significant losses and the Ukrainians were forced to remove them from the line of combat contact. Today we got report about the losses among this national battalion, so very likely if the situation continue to develop the same way, the situation will, the defense belt of Ukrainian armed forces will collapse. So as you can see, now the Ukrainians are trying to hold the line of combat contact defense line by sending more and more reinforcements towards unprotected protected positions. So they sent additional brigade or campaign or company which destroyed by the Russians, and then they're sent more and more forces. So this is the reason it's very interesting how many soldiers they're going to send more, let's say, until they take a decision to fall back from the area. Now we are moving to Avdiivka direction. As we can see, the situation continued developing in Russian favor. We got additional updates about the Russian progress in the fields between Toninka, Pervomayskaya and Vodyane. The Russians established additional control. We have geolocated confirmations. We have confirmations from different mappers. As I understand, during these weeks, the Russians will try to take control over this territory, and after that the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back automatically from Pervomayska as well. The Russians destroyed and continue conducting successful counter-artillery duels with Ukraine artillery positions to the west of the main area of clashes in Toninka, Orlovka and Berdichi. Lots of armored vehicles, lots of mortar positions were destroyed as a result of Russian counter-artillery fire. About Berdichi, the situation is the same. The Russians still haven't managed to force the Ukrainians to fall back. We see that the forces of 47th Mechanized Brigade still control the situation, still are able to hold this area under complete control. They stabilized the situation, and for now the Russians haven't managed to achieve any results on the direction. Novomikhailivka, we have additional updates about further Russian progress. According to different mappers, the Russians improved their positions on the northern part of the village and in the fields to the northeast of the village, and this approximately the current Russian control according to different mappers. Furthermore, as we discussed in the previous updates, there is an update of progress of the Russian armed forces inside of the village itself, and very likely that tomorrow we're going to receive report about complete control over the farms and the barracks to the north, on the northeastern part. We have another video how the Ukraine evacuation team was trying to remove and evacuate some wounded soldiers, but they were discovered and destroyed as a result of Russian FPV drone strike. Furthermore, we have more details and updates about counter-artillery duels. On this video we can see Ukrainian mortar position that was discovered by the Russian drone and destroyed as a result of counter-artillery fire. On Zaporozhye direction we have some activization. The Russians made and conducted another Lemur missile strike in Malinovka, which is probably around 15 since the beginning of this year. This village for some reason is being attacked just by this type of weapon. We have the bombardments of Gulay-Pole. As you can see, there was a short operational pause just for a few days, and now the Russians restored the pressure on the city, on the village, on the area. Very likely the Russians do have some plans on the area. The Russians published the video of destroyed Ukrainian radar also in the same area. Maybe the Russians destroyed the radar before the beginning of Tsirkon attack with the purpose to make the Ukrainians blind for some time, and maybe exactly the destroy of that radar allowed the Russians to reach and destroy Kyiv and staying invisible for so long period of time. Rabotina area, the Russians continue offensive operation trying to encircle the Ukrainians or at least to force them to fall back. In the near future we expect additional progress from the Russian side. We got more updates from Odessa. Today the Russians made two attacks. The first one was in the morning. By 7 p.m. with the local time we got additional report of the second wave of attack. The Ukrainians lost the energy production in the area. The town is blackout and the situation is getting worse and worse, and today the Russians attacked the energy facilities, the station, this station, and after the strike the Ukrainians start suffering problems with supply and support. We have additional reports about the political events. From the 1st of April Poland stops the transit of Ukrainian agricultural products. This is a very bad piece of news for the Ukrainians. From the other side, we receive update from Moldova. They promised the Ukrainians to help them to return back those people who tried to cross the border between Ukraine and Moldova. So Moldova now is the first country in the Europe who agreed to return back people who crossed the border back to Ukraine. Regarding the, let's say, some asks from these people not to send them back. So this is of course not a very good information for people who don't want to fight for Ukraine. But now these people have another option to enter Transnistria and to ask for help in Russia, not to be sent to the line of combat contact. We have the first evidence and first, let's say, events of new kind of protest and strike from the Ukrainians. On this video we can see Ukrainian women who block the road, who stop the roads and traffic on the main Ukrainian road arteries, requiring and demanding to stop this terror from the Ukrainian officers who conduct, let's say, very terrible process of mobilization. For now, there are just few, not so many women in this process, but as I understand, this type of strikes will increase, and more every day we're going to receive more and more of women inside of this process. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.